Yo, what is good? This is much needed and due, as it's been a while since I feel I've been able to project myself how I've been needing to and deliver information that I guess have come upon over the years. Never really done something like this, so it's still new, and I'm gonna be adjusting and moving through it. But expect vulnerability, honesty, and come at it with the open mind, because that's pretty much been a theme for my entire life, basically. You know, just a little bit of background of who I am and what I stand for. When I was younger, I experienced metaphysical events to that kind of degree, and whether that be very lucid style dreaming at a young age, or actually then there projecting myself out of my body, which is called out of body experience. And as time has gone on, this is now topics that have become more and more acceptable, and more people have kind of got vague ideas of what this entails. And this has been very much a life mission of mine to figure out, well, if there's more that meets the eye, then, we gotta meet more of ourselves, basically, So that's that. And from there, it basically led me down a rabbit hole of uncovering and trying to figure out just what is truth and what defines the nature around me. We can have a lot of subjective experiences that can disconnect us because we feel so true to what we have experienced. And, a big understanding of mine recently has been that, subjective nature will always be there, and it's what it is, but with that, there's also objective nature. And, we can look at things subjectively, debate this, and this, go on, back and forth. However, if we're not looking objectively at the bigger picture here, then we're just kind of playing ourselves a bit. And, I see this with lots of different topics: conspiracies, politics, laws and legislations, just division tactics. There's just so many things around us that can divide somebody walking down the street without even having the know or the whereabouts to kind of gauge and read somebody's energy and determine that before you're quick to cut off. And this is where the world is at these days, and it's not something that I'm finding myself wanting to be a part of. And look, we can have. I'm finding these days that faith is sparse, right? And, that doesn't mean that we don't have to not believe in it or agree on it. But, having that faith in yourself can ultimately, lay the foundation for you to see the world how you need to see it and be able to move through it how you need to move through it. I want to read something as well because I believe this will be a nice segue and a good indication of kind of where my mental state is at, given the course of events that's happened within the past few months, and growing through these different types of awarenesses and perspectives, and trying to be still as diligent and responsible as I can. And, if anybody's like me, you can relate to that. And it's very, challenging, compromising of self. Or so it can be. So I'm going to read this. It was something I wrote on my birthday, which was just a few weeks ago, 27. So completed the cycle of 26, which we could get into. It's all about how it ties into yourself. But for me, 26 was, we have the alphabet and understanding that language is, we have half of the picture, the 26, and, to make the full picture, you need the 52. So 26 for me was very much of a completion of something that is physical, that you can see, tangible. And stepping into 27 is now taking the spin on it and saying, okay, cool, well, there's the other half of the language that we don't understand, the symbolism. And so for me, stepping into the 27 and to the next maybe 52 or whatever, how it's going to work out for me, but it's coming into a point of acknowledging that point of view that kind of sits more in the sub. And either way, I'm going to go ahead and read this. So this is how it starts. How can one's brain both encompass such emptiness while simultaneously be practicing such divine morals? How can I be so completely surrounded by loving reminders and also feel so lonely? Am I searching for something deep within or closer externally? Is it the understanding of what to do when you finally pull the sword from the stone and realize wielding it was simply not what was expected? I strive for perfection not because it is unattainable, but because it is something of familiarity. What can I do to arrange my routines to fit the criteria of metaphysics I still do not apprehend? I guess the challenge of life is actually growing, shedding, rebirthing. Are you still the same true individual despite the metamorphosis? I ask daily questions to the highest segments of myself while trials and tribulations of temptations split the threshold. Be better, but be kind. Be emotional, but show none. Be in control, but also let loose. Do not think, but know. I am in what seems to be a constant contradiction of my own equilibrium. I have a vast comprehension with just a particular set of vernacular to express, leaving words meaningless at times. I find more value in a simple eye gaze, which most people would take for granted these days. I don't have all the answers, and I don't need to, yet. I just want to believe in something that nurtures the imagination. How do I contain all these emotions and reactions when the belief system I embody stems from only subjective material? Meaning, everything I experience through this lens is specifically designed for me. How I take on information and experiences is my own pathway. I suppose that is why most people spend their lives not cherishing the moment and inevitably asking for faith when it is only crucial. It is my job to create my nature despite the environment around teasing us for a reaction. I only have control over what is between my ears, as whispers fill the void. I will always believe we can make our own light, and in doing so, eventually emitting around us to be that lead-by-example reference. I may have moments of compromise, but I also have instances of promise. I just want to be able to give back to the ones that believed in me, provided for, and loved me unconditionally. If I had one wish I could choose, it would be to ensure that those very people are saved and have paradise awaiting, even if I have to sacrifice myself to make sure that happens. Adulthood meets adepthood. And yeah, that's just a little excerpt that I felt for a while, Internally, these thoughts that be heavy and weighing on you, that sometimes you may not know how to express, the words, the body language, and that can cause a bit of turmoil for the individual because, what happens in the spiritual place happens a little bit quicker than how it happens here. So, you are trying to grab and hold and make something of ideologies that come from a different place and a different time where our bodies and where we're at now isn't actually quite aligned with it. So we have to go easy on ourselves and understand that, we can have maybe our foot half in, half out, one on the other side, and that can be great. This is great practice to be able to understand yourself, where you've been, where you're at now, and where you're going. But at the same time, it can also cause the individual a little bit of what am I looking for here? Grief, I suppose, in recognizing that there is somewhat of a responsibility to be had, and in knowing that there is such a over encompassing connectiveness to all of this, and to put that pressure on yourself to feel like you are the one that has to make the change and the difference can be scary. And this is what makes us human. And the more that we come together and the more that we communicate with one another, the more we understand that when we look at something as fear, it can also be looked at as courage. So another thing that I had kind of been on recently as well, courage is the ability to ask the big questions regardless of what answer might come of that. So you ask these deep questions to yourself, and they may be very revealing. And the answers we get may be something that is like, oh my gosh, I really wish I didn't even ask that question. But you did anyways. So, if you can take these little essences that you can kind of build upon yourself day in and day out, you create this foundation for you that is built upon truth, right? And I once heard, can you create a truth from a lie? And that will never happen. And unfortunately, where we're at now and what has been built upon is that very nature of things, which is kind of funny because it's counterintuitive to nature and that kind of things. So it makes me feel, you ask these questions and you say, well, what brings me to a part of nature that I feel familiar? And, this has been topics and things that I've looked into. You can get into all sorts of different ancient ideologies and texts and practices, and learn that over the years that we've drifted away from our primordial innate being, which might have actually been more advanced and adept than where we're at now. And we think I just think that's so ignorant that we can, because we have certain things these days that we understand, that we can measure, that we want to discredit what we can't measure actually with history, only based upon, what scientists or anthropologists or archaeologists or anybody in those fields have laid out for us, basically. So where I want to get with this is an unveiling of where we're at, essentially, and this ties into metaphysics, and this ties into the very truth and nature of how this construct that we're in is pieced together. And this, again, as you may understand from my prior reading, is subjective nature, right? So if I can move about in my own reality and have my own view of my reality and tie it into still simple essences that we may have belief systems that are juxtaposed, but if we can still reach a middle point, isn't that the idea of anything anyways? So I only ask for an open mind and what I'm talking about, and if there's anything that I can be educated on, I'm always more than willing to listen and take on and consider what other people have to say and their given time and research that they've accumulated. But I guess we started here, and now when we look at the situation we're in, coronavirus, and the self-isolation, and what this has done for a lot of individuals, and this has been a time that we've been able to really kind of hone in and self-reflect on ourselves and ask these big questions, as I was saying. And, I've noticed I can't help but actually be in a place of just question, right? We've we've been duped and fooled for so long that when any type of global scale type event occurs, I always look at it with the side eye, kind of like, well, what's going on here? What stories being put out? What is the main uh, main source media saying? What are people talking about? How is this tie into not only everything that I've learned and understood about the world now, but where does it trying to take us? And I've noticed that we've kind of navigated into a more technological age where we have our devices and we have sounded like an old ass man, our devices, our computers, our phones, our social medias, our ways to connect with people, our dating apps, all of these things that become so instantaneous, which, take our attention span for an individual, to communicate with an individual, like a goldfish, essentially. So we're at a time where we can have such dullness to, what we're exposed to. And so technology can absolutely be great in so many regards in terms of what we can, pair to help with the environment, or what we can help pair and make better of the medicine. There's so many areas that we can grow and learn to understand with, using things properly and not actually being taken advantage of and only having certain theories and alchemical understandings and makeups held by individuals that are rich and have the means to just practice and do so, where we're going to have a very only particular view of the world, and that is the one that they want us to see. So yeah, this whole situation has been something that I have not related to. It's scare and fear tactics that has led a lot of people to, you know, shrug and turn away from their brothers and their sisters, their mothers, their fathers, their grandparents, the kids, so many different things. That are we really about to just let this world turn into a place that human connection is a rarity? Because I'm for damn sure not going to be around for that, and I am for damn sure going to be making noise about it. And maybe that's why I haven't said anything in the past, is because I've been observing and I've been sitting back, I've been learning. And now we have a point to be vocal and expressive with what we want to see take place in our world. We set the standard and we set the tone, right? As long as the morals and that ethic code aligns to something of nature, of connectiveness, so you could have subjective, but you also have to have objective, and there is objective, and maybe objective is like a frequency, so there's certain frequencies that lie in certain ranges, and that objective nature is truth. And where does truth lie in that spectrum? Truth is an essence of something that's maybe, when you have truth embodying through you, you recognize all aspects of self. So it's vulnerable and it's aware of all depthitudes and densities. So it's actually your choice of which you want to recognize, and it's simple. You just turn it on, and it's inside yourself. So this is the perspective that I am at, and I'm being American and being now living out in Australia, which I have been for the past 7, 8 years. I come from a different culture, where the culture that I live in is a little bit different from with how I've lived out here and how I've seen things take place. I get a little more of a passive nature out in Australia, which is not necessarily a bad thing. It's just maybe it's not as outspoken as you get as sometimes in America, where it's maybe a little too outspoken, and it can be a little bit like, okay, this person needs to be quiet. But if anything, it's taught me that this nature has given me a little bit of a backbone, and I come from a culture where, there was oppression and unjust, uncivil rights upon people, that, women, terrible rights that they weren't granted access to in the early centuries, 1900s, and then African Americans who built the foundation of the country, you know, to then have to build their way back up to have any sort of right, to have somebody stand up for something that they were willing to die for. These are ideals that not many people understand these days. And I can't help but to almost have a heavy heart for my brothers and sisters back at home that have faced such oppression and faced such difficulties. Like I'm saying, when you're walking down the street and you're divided based just off of like a skin tone, like you're into color games then at that point, and that's not where we need to be with things. But point being, you got to stand for something you believe in, and you got to be able to die for something you believe in. And if you are willing to do that, then that's how change is made, and that's how change was made. And so we've oppressed and we've looked down upon these people that have represented things that you, and I'm not saying you, but I'm saying the majority would for damn sure, they rather bunker up in their house and be scared of the world outside of them to go rally in the streets and be together. And this is that backward nature that I'm talking about. And if it's backwards and it's upside down, then you not only got to flip the script, but you got to turn it too. So we've been deceived, and I can't allow these people around me to be deceived any further. And it's ultimately up to you whether you want to choose to expand your horizon. And what does that entail? That's maybe breaking your entire foundation, right? And when we break our foundation, that means that the ground we walk upon becomes unstable, right? And well, what happens when the ground we were already walking on was unstable? It's like, I don't know. I would say make that jump. Don't allow fear to be something that holds you back. Allow it to be something that propels you. I've listened to things recently that, confrontation doesn't have to be a negative thing. Confrontation can be amazing when you have the ability to meet it with that innocence and be able to be flowy and bounce off with it and not take on something and not push with something, but allow yourself to have your views and to stand in them and be balanced. That's, I believe, is the ultimate key to all of this. And what's balanced? And we're in a nature that is extremely imbalanced. We have countries that are extremely impoverished, that don't even have access to medicine, clean water, any sort of livelihood technology that could propel them into a world that we could see future leaders and future peoples that understand connectiveness to the land. But it's these people that we need to be standing up for, because coming from a very westernized culture, we're very privileged, and understanding that is a lot of people that are out there don't have a voice right now, and we need to be able to recognize our privilege. And if it's as simple as looking as there's people here that don't have access to the most basic essences of being a human, then that's not balance. And how do we get, from where we're at now to a place of balance? Is that evolution? Is that a certain type of fall from where we're at now? And I believe it is. And I feel a lot of people believe that, we've been building up for something that's ready to kind of smack us in the face. And, instead of being fearful of it, I'm actually very excited, because what I embody in myself, I don't actually have that fear within me. When you recognize what that frequency contains, it's not somewhere you want to be, and it's not somewhere that you want to ever have hold over you, right? So, I am not naive. I can see and recognize that maybe there is an agenda, or there's initiatives being taken place that we need to be wary of and we need to fight for. But I also can expect some of the most grand um, revelations as well. I've got faith, so to speak, and that's not in any one particular faith. That's actually my hand in a lot of different faiths. I've studied a lot of different things, and I've had a lot of experiences that I can relate in Catholicism. I've had different experiences that I can relate to from Hinduism. I've had other experiences from Buddhism that I can relate to. And I've lived with people from the Middle East, so I can understand aspects of the Quran. And this is, something that is unique, as some individuals can get tied into a belief system and that becomes dominant. But if you can see the symbology that's tied into all of it, you can then see the stories and the metaphors that tie together that lead us to actually understand, okay, cool, this is where I'm at now. And it's understanding our past, and what do our ancestors actually tell us about the past and where we're at and the nature around us. And for me, this was the kind of, that first piece that I started chipping away. And it was, recognizing, well, maybe we're not actually where we think we're at. And I couldn't help but just do a bit further research. And, come to find is that not just one, but every prior civilization before the heliocentric model existed believed that we were actually contained within a system, ecosystem, or an incubator, or a frequency layered egg, whatever it may be, floating on the back of a tortoise swimming through the cosmos. Like it's like a snow globe or whatever. It's how it's depicted, right? The waters above, the waters below, the stars or the reflection of the stars down here. It was all very centralized. It was an understanding that the universe was central and it was accessible, not something that was so vast and incomprehensible that, I've heard things that there's more planets and stars and life systems out there than there are grains of sand in the whole world. And where does that put an individual? That puts an individual so isolated that, it's like, well, if there's all of this out there, then I can't be any magnificent. And that's bullshit, because we are probably the most magnificent things that have came to be. And whether that's divine intervention and whether that's a part of where we're going and adapting towards, we'll see. But yeah, it was commonly understood that the center of the earth was the access point to the heavens, or the highest regions, and below us was the underworld. And I don't want to necessarily get into any one specific ideology, and because I could elaborate. I could talk about Shambhala, I could talk about Avalon, I could talk about Eden, I could talk about this it's a centralized point, this place that was believed that was where we actually come from, Atlantis, right? It's understanding all of these stories that we've heard in the past and tying it to a point of, well, how does this make sense, right? And what I believe is that we come from that original race, and from that place, that type of connectiveness is thought manifestation and complete harmony with our nature. I believe there would be no killing that would take place there. There would be energetic communion. So there wouldn't be need for things as such as killing to even eat. You wouldn't even need to eat. You would be self-sustaining off of your own energy. You would be able to telepathically create and communicate with other individuals that would be of that same kind of state. You would then maybe be able to go and create your own ideology of heaven once you figured out how to remove yourself from, say, this construct, which is what the ancients also believed. This is kind of like a bit of like an incubator place where we have access to actually explore different regions and different points of ourself, and not actually being bounded by time and stepping into a place where it's just omnipresent. And so, for me, if that's what I'm headed towards, then okay, let me open my mind a little bit and see what I can gather from these stories that come from such grand structure. And from my understanding, is we come from a more matriarchal togetherness type setting, and we've fallen, or we've been fooled, or we've been led astray, and now we've been in duality where we've kind of been playing small for a little too long, and we've allowed these forces of subnature to kind of come and have predominant rule over our moral ethic and our standards. And when you can see this is so reflective in music or media or any industry that you could basically think of. We had is a bit of evil tied into all of it, and you gotta it's hard, right? Because you can have so many different theories and conspiracies all over the different place, but when you actually can understand it and tie it together from a point that makes sense, is when you can move forward and say, oh, well, this is maybe how it happens. And I believe we've had access to magic, essentially, since the beginning of time, whether we've been magical beings or whether the nature around us has had capabilities of magic to it. And I believe that over time there's been certain types of entities that have limited and preserved that magic strictly for them. And in doing so, they've created this nature of this magic and have used it as dark magic, and have casted their spell upon and over us, even to the fact that our devices, they're conjuring screens, they're crystallized screens that we tell our darkest, deepest secrets into, and reflect back at us as if it was a crystal ball, right? So we have aspects around us that we've had. It's called scrying. I'll just go ahead and say that scrying is when you look into a crystal ball and you're able to foresee. So that's what these screens are essentially are as well. So when we Black Mirror, for instance, our Netflix shows that we so praise, and what do those represent? We have this undertone that's been building for a while, this sub-dense nature that what takes place down there. And I'll speak from experiences. I've seen what goes on in these types of places, and what these energies and what these deities look like. And imagine what it would be like to not ever see light. What would those type of beings, and does that make an individual bad, or does that make an individual ignorant? Some, just because a being has maybe never seen light, does it mean that they're not deserving of it? Or does it mean that they only had to see the light to know it existed, right? So I believe it is up to us to, it's easy to communicate to the people that make sense of what we talk about, but relating to people that don't necessarily believe or agree in anything we might say is actually going to be, the challenge is seeping a little bit of that lightness into maybe that denseness where you can break it apart a little bit. But this is the trip to the world that we're in right now, as a lot of things seem to be very dense and dull and non-empathetic and non-compassionate. We literally have people on this planet that I believe, use their dark rituals to prolong not only their lives but their agendas, and get up to certain things that would keep us up at night, and could only imagine in the darkest horror movies that we see. And I believe it takes place. And there's evidence that if we even can look at it and say that there's even the slightest bit of evidence towards this, that we should absolutely bound together as people and say this should not be taking place in my world. And I don't know, maybe this is just how I feel, maybe this is how a bunch of people feel, but I can't allow myself to not be outspoken any further about this. Um, I've started praying for those individuals, not because, well, because, sometimes a person may have to put themselves in a situation of sacrifice or selling their souls because they had to provide for their entire family, and they had to be a scapegoat to be able to give life to their mother, their brothers and sisters. I know this happens in America with a lot of even the hip hop culture, and as you see, a lot of these rappers, they come out here coming from lifestyles where, well, everything around them has kind of not given them hope, and so when they get an instance of hope, but it's required for something bigger that they might not even understood what they were getting into, then I will pray for them, even though what they represent may be something of this devilish nature. It may not be what they truly are, and this is being a individual of true forgiveness, right? Or representing altruism at a characteristic that it's kind of just flowing. And I really believe that that's going to be that healing nature that can move this world in a direction forward. And in order to do so, we have to take these blindfolds off and see that there's, such imbalances in the way that children are treated, the way that access to healthcare, access to food, access to information, knowledge, access to understanding of mental health and self, access to information on esoteric content, access to information of there's Gnosticism, which is being, like I had expressed, knowing without thinking. So I guess I digress a bit, but this needed to come out, and maybe I do something like this again where I kind of just talk and I can get more in depth in terms of different topics, as I've been particularly gifted with a certain set of information, not only that I've accumulated from my own personal outstretched research and my own internal subjective experiences, out-of-body experiences, coming out and navigating into astral planes, having a bit of my hand in Freemasonry, have received and understand a lot of their texts and practices for what they are, ritual magic. Very, very lucky to have been given insight into a world that not a lot of people may understand actually exists, and it's mind-blowing. So, if there's any questions or any topics that somebody may want to have discourse over or talk about, I'm more than welcoming the opportunity to talk about anything, whether it be, if we can move forward in a direction of, all right, let's look at it from a curiosity standpoint, opposed to something that we're going to try to break each other down even further, because it's just not going to be acknowledged if it's brought in a way that I feel is non-intentful. So, thanks for listening, and as my mentor always says, wholeness and balanced vibrations. I hope that, everybody can go about the rest of their days, weeks, or month. Looks like we're on the trail end of this isolation, which is an amazing thing. Everybody's done a great job at banding together, and though it may be maybe more people are on the extreme side and maybe more people are on the fear side, I'm kind of right in the middle with it. So if anybody does need to talk or does need to, get some things off their chests, you know where to reach me. So I appreciate, this time that we've had, and I'll look to do this again in the future. maybe doing something with my own music in the background of it, or maybe looking to, like I was saying, expand upon more broader topics. And as some of you know as well, I do make and produce music, and I've got some new material coming out as well. That is, I try to tie my content into the nature of metaphysics and esoteric, conscious hip hop, so to speak. So if anybody does vibe with that, I go by Obi, which is an acronym for out of body experience, which makes sense, right? So again, I'll leave it at that, and thank you for listening. And we'll be back at it.